leaves a neural trace. What if a single terrifying moment could rewire your brain forever, changing how you perceive every second of your life? Trauma isn't just a memory. It's a biological imprint, physically altering neural circuits. When someone experiences extreme fear, threat, or pain, the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, goes into overdrive, firing repeatedly to encode danger signals. Meanwhile, the hippocampus, the region responsible for contextualizing memories, can shrink under chronic stress. The result: memories become fragmented and emotionally charged, leaving the brain hyperalert to any potential danger. In 1995, Dr. Rachel Yehuda and colleagues studied Holocaust survivors and their children. MRI scans revealed structural changes in the hippocampus and amygdala, correlating with PTSD severity. This wasn't just academic. The altered brain structures explained why survivors had flashbacks that could feel more real than the present moment. Even decades later, the same neural pathways fire, making a past trauma feel like it's happening right now. A single trauma can trigger long-term potentiation in fear circuits. Ordinary triggers: a car backfiring, a certain smell, a tone of voice can hijack perception, making the past feel immediate. Example: Jane, who survived a violent assault, walks past a bakery where she first experienced panic years ago. Suddenly, the smell of bread triggers intense fear and physical reactions. Even though she is perfectly safe, her brain treats the memory as current reality. Neuroscientists call this fear generalization. The brain spreads the trauma response to similar stimuli to prevent danger. Evolutionarily, it's adaptive, but in modern life, it can trap survivors in a constant loop of anxiety. And trauma doesn't only change fear circuits. It rewires emotional valuation, attention networks, and even decision-making processes, creating a mind perpetually on high alert, scanning for threats that may not exist. The brain itself becomes a predator, feeding on its own history. Chapter 2: The Amygdala. Your brain's alarm system on overdrive. Imagine your brain sounding a fire alarm, even when the building is empty. That's trauma. The amygdala evolved for survival. It detects threats within milliseconds, preparing the body for fight or flight. Trauma can lock it into always-in mode, flooding the system with stress hormones, cortisol, norepinephrine, and adrenaline. These chemicals alter neuronal connectivity, making the amygdala more reactive, more sensitive, and more aggressive in responding to perceived threats. Joseph Ledoux's landmark studies demonstrated that the amygdala can react before conscious awareness. In experiments with conditioned fear in rats, Ledoux showed that animals freeze at stimuli long before the cortex processes them logically. Humans are no different. Your brain can initiate terror before you even register danger. Example: combat veterans hear a backfire or a loud bang. Instantly, their bodies tense, heart rate spikes, sweat pours, even if there's no threat. The brain treats it as a real danger because trauma has wired fear circuits to over-respond. Chronic overactivation also reshapes attention systems. Trauma survivors scan the environment obsessively, seeking cues that could indicate danger. Eye-tracking studies reveal that PTSD patients fixate disproportionately on potential threats, ignoring neutral or positive cues. Beyond perception, the amygdala hijack affects learning, memory, and decision-making. High amygdala activity can override the prefrontal cortex, suppressing rational thought. Survivors often react impulsively, an emotional hijack rooted in brain biology. Trauma doesn't just make you afraid. It makes fear automatic, omnipresent, and uncontrollable, shaping every decision, every glance, every heartbeat. Chapter 3: Hippocampus Hijacked. When context fails, what if your brain remembered everything but nothing correctly? The hippocampus is the brain's librarian, placing memories in context, time, place, sequence. Trauma interferes with this process. When the hippocampus is impaired, memories become isolated fragments of intense emotion, disconnected from time or logic. This is why PTSD flashbacks feel as if the past is unfolding in the present. A 1997 study by Bremner et al. Confirmed that PTSD patients had reduced hippocampal volume, correlating with memory disorganization. When a trauma survivor smells smoke or hears a sound similar to the original trauma, the hippocampus fails to contextualize it. The brain says, "Danger now," even if the threat no longer exists. Example: a woman who experienced a house fire decades ago hears fireworks at a wedding. The hippocampus cannot differentiate between past and present. Panic ensues. Her brain treats the memory as current reality. The hippocampal failure interacts with amygdala hyperactivation. Fragmented memories are amplified by fear. This combination explains the reliving phenomenon, where trauma isn't recalled as a story, but re-experienced with full sensory and emotional intensity. Furthermore, trauma can cause overgeneralization. The brain applies fear learning to broad contexts. The firefighter who survived one blaze may fear all flames, all heat, all smoky environments. This is adaptive in dangerous settings, but maladaptive in everyday life. The hippocampus is the gatekeeper of memory and context, but trauma turns it into a distorted lens, making the world feel perpetually threatening and unsafe. Chapter 4: The neurochemistry of pain and pleasure. Trauma doesn't just make life scarier. It rewires what your brain perceives as reward and punishment. Trauma floods the brain with dopamine, norepinephrine, and cortisol, creating a feedback loop between stress and reward systems. The brain becomes addicted to the neurochemical highs of stress, tension, and arousal. Survivors may unconsciously seek high-risk situations to regain a sense of control or normalize their internal state. Studies in effective neuroscience show trauma can rewire dopamine pathways. Ordinary pleasure, like eating a favorite meal or listening to music, may feel muted. Thrill-seeking, extreme sports, or risky behaviors can feel normal, because the brain craves the same intensity of neural activation it learned during trauma. Example: childhood neglect survivors might pursue gambling, extreme sports, or emotionally abusive relationships. Their brains unconsciously chase arousal balance, attempting to stabilize dysregulated circuits. Additionally, Trauma affects serotonin and GABA systems, impairing emotional regulation and increasing vulnerability to anxiety and depression. Emotional highs and lows become magnified, unpredictable, and intense. The brain's reward-punishment mapping is no longer objective. Pain and pleasure overlap. Fear and excitement intertwine. And trauma survivors can find danger exhilarating and safety underwhelming. Chapter 5. Limbic System Overload. Emotion becomes reality. What you feel isn't always what's happening. It's what your brain insists is happening. The limbic system, including the amygdala, insula, and anterior cingulate cortex, dominates emotional processing. Trauma shifts perception. Neutral events are interpreted as threats. MRI studies reveal that even mundane stimuli trigger limbic hyperactivation in PTSD patients. Example: a casual comment from a friend triggers rage. A stranger's glance is interpreted as judgment. The brain interprets minor stimuli through the lens of past trauma. The limbic system also interacts with sensory perception. Trauma survivors may misread visual or auditory information, seeing shadows as figures or hearing threats in neutral noise. Eye-tracking experiments confirm heightened vigilance and selective attention to threat cues in trauma-exposed individuals. Beyond perception, emotion hijacks decision-making and memory. Limbic dominance can suppress rational analysis, leaving survivors reactive and impulsive. Emotional intensity overrides logical processing, a mechanism rooted in survival but maladaptive in everyday life. Trauma creates a feedback loop. Heightened emotion amplifies perception, which strengthens fear circuits, which further amplifies emotion. Breaking this loop requires neuroplasticity and conscious intervention, a process explored in therapies like EMDR and exposure therapy. The brain, in essence, has rewritten the rules. The emotional reality of trauma becomes the dominant reality, reshaping cognition, perception, and behavior. Chapter 6. The prefrontal cortex under siege. Logic versus emotion. What happens when your brain's rational filter shuts down and fear runs the show? The prefrontal cortex, PFC, is the brain's executive center. It regulates impulses, plans, actions, and controls emotional reactions. Trauma disrupts its function. Research by Itkin et al. 2006 shows that in PTSD patients, prefrontal amygdala connectivity is weakened, meaning the PFC cannot effectively calm an overactive fear circuit. This imbalance explains why trauma survivors often react impulsively, sometimes aggressively, even when there is no real threat. The brain's logic center is literally hijacked by past fear. Example: a survivor of childhood abuse may snap at a friend's innocent joke, not out of anger, but because their PFC cannot suppress an automatic fear-driven response. Functional MRI scans reveal that their PFC fires less, while the amygdala floods the system with stress signals. Neurotransmitters play a critical role. Chronic cortisol exposure damages synapses in the PFC, impairing decision-making, emotional regulation, and working memory. This rewiring explains why survivors struggle with concentration, long-term planning, and emotional control. Trauma doesn't erase rationality. It temporarily overrides it, creating moments where the brain is reactive, not reflective. Recovery depends on neuroplastic rewiring, strengthening prefrontal circuits through therapy, mindfulness, and cognitive exercises. Chapter 7: Dissociation: Escaping Reality to Survive. Sometimes the mind doesn't just remember trauma, it leaves the body entirely. Dissociation is the brain's extreme defense mechanism. Under overwhelming stress, neural networks in the cingulate cortex, insula, and temporoparietal junction reduce integration, producing detachment from self and environment. Neuroimaging confirms that dissociation suppresses the limbic system, temporarily shielding the survivor from unbearable emotion. Example: a survivor of prolonged abuse might watch events unfold from outside their body during moments of stress. They may feel numb, disconnected, or unreal. X scans show decreased limbic activity, correlating with diminished emotional response. But dissociation has a cost. Memories stored during dissociative states are often fragmented. This complicates therapy and daily functioning, leaving the survivor with gaps, confusion, and sometimes flashbacks that appear out of nowhere. Dissociation isn't imaginary. It's neurobiologically real, an adaptive survival response that can inadvertently perpetuate trauma cycles if not integrated consciously. Chapter 8: Triggers: The brain's hidden minefield. Ordinary sights, sounds, or smells can unleash a storm in the mind before you even realize it. Trauma doesn't just linger. It creates a map of danger in the brain. These are triggers, cues, that automatically reactivate past fear circuits. Research by Roche et al. 2006 shows that neutral stimuli associated with trauma, a perfume, a sound, a shadow, can provoke full-scale physiological responses: elevated heart rate, sweating, and adrenaline surges. Example story: consider Michael, a firefighter who survived a building collapse. Years later, the sound of a distant siren or the smell of smoke throws him into a panic attack. His body reacts before his conscious mind can intervene. Functional MRI shows his amygdala firing wildly, while the prefrontal cortex struggles to regain control. Michael isn't imagining danger. His brain is convinced it's real. Triggers can be subtle. Subliminal cues, partial images, even fleeting glances can ignite the trauma network. Eye-tracking studies confirm that trauma survivors scan their environment obsessively, constantly seeking hidden threats, even in mundane situations. The danger is in the feedback loop. Triggers reinforce trauma memory, and trauma memory increases trigger sensitivity. Ordinary life becomes a minefield where neutral experiences can explode into fear or rage at any moment. Deep dive. Neurochemically, triggers activate the hypothalamic pituitrinal HPA axis, flooding the body with cortisol and norepinephrine. Over time, repeated activations sensitize neural circuits, making the person hypervigilant and emotionally volatile. In extreme cases, even safety can feel threatening. Hook for viewers. Imagine walking through your day. Every mundane object, potentially a doorway back into terror. Yet you cannot predict which one will set it off. Chapter 9. Post-trauma growth. Rewiring the shadow trauma can shatter you, or it can teach your brain to evolve if you know how to fight back. The brain's plasticity is its superpower. Trauma doesn't have to be permanent. Neural circuits can be rewired. Therapy, mindfulness, EMDR, and cognitive restructuring help the prefrontal cortex regain control over the amygdala while strengthening hippocampal function. Van der Kolk, 2014, documented measurable changes in brain connectivity after consistent therapy, proving that fear circuits can be tempered. Example story. Emma, a survivor of childhood abuse, had flashbacks triggered by mundane events. During EMDR sessions, therapists guided her through eye movement patterns, allowing her hippocampus to properly contextualize memories. Over weeks, her fear responses diminished, triggers no longer hijacked her day, and the amygdala calmed. MRI scans confirmed decreased activity in fear circuits. Deep dive. Recovery isn't instant. The brain must learn new associations. Through exposure therapy, it practices safety repeatedly, teaching amygdala circuits to stand down. Neurochemically, dopamine and serotonin pathways normalize, improving emotional regulation. Post-trauma growth isn't just therapy. It's about conscious engagement, journaling, confronting triggers, and cultivating. Research shows that survivors who intentionally reflect and process trauma demonstrate increased prefrontal control and lower baseline anxiety. Hook for viewers. The same circuits that once trapped you in terror can become your allies, rewired to empower you, not enslave you. Chapter 10. The dark mind in everyday life. Trauma isn't only in extreme cases. It quietly shapes perception, behavior, and relationships. For anyone who's lived through fear, even minor or early life trauma leaves neural imprints. Subtle triggers, unconscious biases, and heightened vigilance affect daily life. Neurobiologically, these are the same mechanisms as severe PTSD, just less extreme. Example story. Alex grew up with a critical parent. Now, as an adult, neutral feedback at work feels like rejection. His limbic system amplifies minor cues into emotional firestorms. The prefrontal cortex struggles to mediate. Over time, Alex becomes avoidant in relationships, hypervigilant at work, and emotionally reactive. Trauma shapes perception. The world feels unsafe. Ordinary interactions are charged with potential threat, and even neutral or positive experiences are filtered through fear circuits. Functional imaging shows that in trauma-exposed adults, the amygdala and insula respond to neutral stimuli as if they are threatening. Deep dive. Awareness is key. Understanding how trauma rewires perception allows conscious intervention. Techniques like mindfulness, cognitive reframing, and controlled exposure gradually recalibrate the brain, reducing hypervigilance and restoring agency. Neuroplasticity enables survivors to reshape responses, transforming reactive circuits into tools of insight and resilience. Hook for viewers. Trauma doesn't just haunt memory, it redefines reality itself. but knowledge and intentional practice can reclaim control, turning the dark mind into a map for survival, growth, and empowerment.